For the next 50 minutes or so, I'd like to focus on identity as the foundation for digital revolution or evolution, depending on how you look at the world. My name is Dieter Schuller. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Business Development at Radiant Logic. And I'd like to introduce our two panelists. Dimitrios Tzimas is the Executive Director for Cybersecurity and Architecture at UBS. And Ankur Ahuja is the Head of Information Security at Fareportal. And the idea is to get a conversation going here. I'd love to get input from everyone that's attending. I'll start by getting the conversation going and giving you guys a few things to think about. And we'll let the panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about where they are and where they're headed and what they see as far as challenges and opportunities, and also some of the lessons that they've learned. So I think we can all agree, and it was evident in some of the discussions that we've seen so far, that the digital evolution or revolution is upon us. For many of us, it's happening a lot faster than we want or than we think. If you look at COVID as an example and what it has forced in terms of changes, we are now forced to work from home, whereas before we were coming into the office and we were on the network. The fact that we're no longer on the network presents some significant opportunities and challenges, all of which are somehow related to identity. And I'll talk through some examples as we go through this session. If you look at our customers, they used to come into the retail physical location or the branch, right? Oftentimes now they can't do that anymore. They used to call the call center. The call center may not even be working. Lots of things that have changed, and it's forced us in many ways to look at our business models and go from something that has been relatively predictable to something that is very unpredictable, and to accommodate that and make sure that we can manage based on these changes that are required of us. And I would argue that for all of this, identity is the foundation. Most organizations, if you talk to them about identity, view identity from a security perspective, which is valid. Right, so you ask people, like, what's your justification for identity? How do you talk to the stakeholders about this? How do you talk to the management team? And they all will tell you that we look at identity as a way to make sure that we have security. The question that we ask is, did identity provide the right access? If the answer is yes, then we're doing our job. I would argue that if you look at identity from the perspective of, did it provide the right user experience? And did it enable our business? You start to really understand the value of identity. And if you don't look at it holistically like that, you start to realize for every project that you want to do that has to do with digital transformation, right? So the vision, when people start talking about this, is I'm going to create a much more frictionless user experience. I'm going to do a better job of customer acquisition. I'm going to increase adoption. I'm going to improve customer satisfaction. I'm going to do a better job of cross-selling and upselling. I'm going to make things as part of the experience much more relevant, right? All of that doesn't happen if you don't have your basic foundation in identity, right? So as a very simple example, all of that requires that if you have existing legacy systems that are stovepipe or silos, that you provide single sign-on across those. Because if you don't provide single sign-on, the customer is going to come back and say, hey, you're asking me questions that I've already answered somewhere else. I've already signed in and told you who I am. Why are you doing that again? I already told you who I am. I expect to get access to everything, not just my, and I'll use an insurance example, automobile coverage, but I also expect to be able to file a medical claim because I have two different relationships with you. Why do I have to do that in two different places? And the list goes on. So if you do a good job with identity and you make identity a dial tone, where in much the same way that when you plug in a phone, one of the beautiful things about your phones, which we don't use anymore that much, but is that they work when you plug them in because there's a dial tone, right? If you think about the concept that if you make identity the dial tone, then every single project that you end up doing when it comes to digital transformation doesn't turn into a project within a project that takes longer than the project because you don't have a good handle on identity. So with that, I will ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Dimitrios, we'll start with you. If you could give us a sense for, well, first of all, what's your role? And then secondly, where are you today as far as digital transformation? What are your plans? What do you see as the major opportunities and challenges?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dimitrios Tzimas. I'm leading the cybersecurity service architecture at UBS. I lead a global team and devising solutions in various areas of cybersecurity, including identity and access management. And being a bank, a global bank, we're subject to different regulatory requirements. And we're in the midst of various transformational projects within UBS. One of them is innovative moving to the cloud. UBS has made a huge commitment of about $400 million to move into the cloud in a big way. We view that as being the way to revolutionize a lot of areas of our development, and at the same time continue to service our internal and external clients. So identity is a cornerstone to our operations, obviously being in the banking sector. And I would actually broaden the question more to identity and access management. In our case, we have a number of systems, from entitled systems to movers, leavers, joiners. But we have spent quite a bit of time in integration of the systems to provide a unified experience to the end user using single sign-on. But even for our mature deployment of identity access management, as we move into the cloud and now the transformational projects, we see some of this being strained, especially how do you move the identity into the cloud using the federation technologies. I imagine, like most people in this audience, there's a reliance on some big directories in-house, Active Directory and the like. And then I assume most people do some federation. But we're looking more globally, how do we interface with other providers, how do other companies, multi-cloud deployment when it comes to identity and access management. So having said that, being in security, we get involved in all those transformational projects early on from the design phase. Not just because it's a regulatory requirement, but also because we view security as an enabler. And identity and access management is the key enabler to the delivery of those projects. And we'll talk more about that later on as to if you don't do that, what will happen to your projects. You keep discovering the wheel, basically.
Yeah. And one question for you. Do you look at this from the perspective of primarily the workforce, or is it all of the different constituents, including customers?
All of the different constituents, including customers. Yeah, we know we are 100,000 strong as a UBS company, but we're the largest wealth management company in the world. So we have to service private clients and also retail clients in certain areas of Europe. So we're looking more holistically how to provide that experience. And
so
when we say identity, I want to just broaden a little bit about, because I'm thinking more in terms not just human identity, but also non-human identity. And this is something that is often ignored, especially as we move more into the different environments in the DevOps. And you have to worry about other non-human identities, and from system accounts to even code, and so it gets a little bit more complicated unless you have a clear strategy and how you'll be able to implement your transformational activities.
You bring up a very good point. One of the things that Yuri mentioned in the session earlier this morning is we've gone from islands of automation to islands of information, and if we don't do a good job of making it so that that information can flow and get exchanged and is accessible by the right systems, we will fail, right? All of that means APIs.
Correct.
And APIs, in some ways, need their own identity, and you need to understand the relationship between the APIs and the people that quote unquote own them. And if you don't do that well, you'll have failure and security holes. So we should spend a little bit of time talking about that as well. The example that I hear consistently in the financial world is, I have a person that has a very small account with me in the retail banking sector, but they're also the CEO of a company that has a very large relationship with me, or they have a huge wealth management account. And if I don't do a good job of tying all that together, I don't necessarily treat people the way that I need to treat them from a business perspective. So at some point, I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to next introduce Ankur. Ankur, if you could take a minute, just tell us about yourself and where you are and where you're going.
Yes. So my name is Ankur Ahuja, and I am global CISO of Fareportal. Fareportal is a small 4,000 people company. We are located in 8 countries. We are online travel agencies. If you've heard of cheapoair.com, if you've ever booked a ticket with Cheapo Air, One Travel, Fairbuzz, these are brands. Cheapo is one of our renowned brands. So in good times, we used to book something like 40,000 tickets a day. With COVID, we are one of the frontliners which got impacted. And that also brought us on the table when we talking about digital revolution. Yes, I do agree that COVID brought us to a place where we wanted to develop, bring our technology stack, everything as of yesterday. And that's also, so one of the examples I can definitely share is generally on a normal day, pre-COVID, we used to get some 30,000 calls on our call center, inquiring, sales, any kind of issues. 11th, 12th of March, when things started going bad, I remember on 15th of March, we got around 200,000 calls in our contact center. Now, the situation became bad because one, the refund process is not automated. Airlines are not supporting the refund process to be automated because we are an online travel agency. So what we need to do is we need to immediately automate it. But the problem is other. The problem is now that with our contact centers based out of Mexico, India, and some of the in US states also, how will people work from home? And that became, so all these agents, so one, you've got so many calls. Second, there's nobody to attend even 30,000 calls because people are working from home, right? And when you were talking about identity and customer identity, and we get into all these GDPRs and PCIs and IS 27001s of the world, we kind of make sure that the machine is not taken out. They can't access their phone. They can't access pen and paper. You've got all those monitoring controls on the plate. And suddenly you find one fine day that nothing is working because now you're asking people to take machines home. How will I manage identities of my customer who are really worried? On the one, they wanted to get refund, at the same time they don't want their data to be leaked, right? So those are the, and bringing the security angle as you were talking about it, right? So that was the problem which we were trying to face. And the only way we were able to come out, and we are still in the business, was because we were able to transform, we were able to bring this digital evolution very fast. And I think all companies were looking forward for that. So for example, how we integrated with almost 300 odd airlines in the matter of 5 days to automate the refund process. We put it on our website that, please do not call us for refunds. If you wanted to do a refund, fill up the form and it will be automatically done, right? So that's the kind of change we brought in. But at the same time, I don't know if how many of you know, but travel is after banking, definitely. Travel is one of the sector where identity privilege is at peak. A simple example can be, if you book a ticket, an airline ticket, in 24 hours, you can cancel it for free. So if the contact number or an email address, which is the most important part of PII, goes out, the other travel agent will call you and give you $5 discount and ask you to book the ticket. So that's how it is. And when we are talking about millions of identities like this, 40,000 tickets coming in a day like this, it's very difficult to manage this, especially when you have got your contact centers based out of Mexico and India and all those locations. Remotely you have to manage it. So there was a lot of problems which you have to go through, and we now are at a situation where we are kind of complying to regulations, the Department of Transport regulations. We are complying to our PCI requirements. We are complying to our protection and ensuring that there is no pilferage happening, to an extent that we, even when people are working from home, we monitor everything. You can think of like, we call it as online. We've brought in a lot of automation, and that's what digital transformation kind of work for us, where we are even monitoring if a user has clicked on the machine and have done cancellations which are of higher volume and then took a break. can my system analyze all this and give me a fraud pattern saying that this is a fraud? Now, we were not doing all this earlier because people are sitting in office and they were doing it. But now when they're offline, when they're at their homes, that's the kind of challenge which we are facing, and we've kind of come through that journey. So these are a couple of examples which we have kind of taken up when we are talking about digital transformation in the identity space. And definitely believe that if data is the new oil, identity is the stickiness in the oil, right? So that's what it is. And from a concept standpoint, I think there have been a concept of security by design for almost 3-4 years. Privacy by design came up when the GDPR and CCPA came into existence. But now there is definitely a time of identity by design. Can we think of when anybody is thinking of any new product, can we think of how it will impact my identity of my customer, how it will impact identity of my employee? So we'll have to think from that direction. This is something which will come up over next couple of months as people will start keep remote and start working, keep on working from home.
Well, you brought up a great point initially when you realized that your call center employees had to work from home, right? What I hear consistently from everyone that's in that situation is they take for granted the fact that everyone's going to have access to things that they may not have access to. So there's things that I can do on the network that I can't do when I'm not on the network. If I have a VPN, if I don't have the computer that allows me to get to that VPN, I may not even be able to do that. So all of a sudden, right, what we've seen consistently is there's this giant need to provide access to resources.
That's correct.
And the firewall is gone, and identity has, the perimeter is gone to a large extent, right? And identity has become the new perimeter. And if you don't pay attention to it, you don't have security. So Dimitrios, I'd love to understand from your perspective, why is identity important at UBS? Where does it fit? And what are you guys doing in that world right now?
Yeah, let me just first address what you said about the COVID impact and people not being able to go to the offices. I mean, UBS made the investment a few years back to provide an alternative workspace from home. So at this point, UBS is operating 95%, full capacity. If you exclude certain capacity issues that had to be solved at the circuit level, we have noticed no drop in productivity. Everybody seems to be able to log in using the systems and access the resources, right? So there are a few areas like trading that obviously people have to go to the office to run the models and the likes. But generally speaking, if you look at digital transformation, that is an area where we looked at a few years back and made the decision to go very heavily into that direction using VDI and other technology, and paid off for COVID-19 in our case. So the identity access management is a cornerstone of what we're doing. As we said, we don't want to be thinking, it's the concept of dial tone, right? We have thousands of applications being designed within UBS in any given year, right? And all of them require access to an identity access management framework. We don't want the developers to rediscover that. So it's a cornerstone of our security and productivity at the same time. If you want to develop code, you'll be given access to those systems. You don't have to worry about identity. It will be handled transparently, right? Using single sign-on. That is what is happening now internally, and we're extending that concept into the cloud, but looking more carefully at more modern technologies, moving away from some L to more modern frameworks for doing that. So it is a cornerstone. It's very crucial to us for a lot of different purposes, both regulatory and otherwise. We need to verify who the users are. We need to be able to tie their access to resources based on their identity. You have to remember that we're subject to so many different regulations. We're also Swiss bank, which means certain data cannot traverse in cross regulatory areas, which complicates the design quite a bit, right? As you lay out your identity access management framework.
So I would imagine when a new project comes in, as part of your role as the cybersecurity architect, you look at what they're doing and make sure that they're doing everything well. What do you look for? as far as identity goes.
You look them to tie to existing systems, right? You do not want developers to go out devise their own secret management systems or identity management. Even the provisioning itself needs to happen centrally, right? You don't get, you don't have somebody logging in and getting an AD account because the sysadmin logs into the direct nets. No, there's an overall cycle of entitlement, in terms of rights and identities that is managed in the background and then loaded into the systems. So that's pretty streamlined, and that's the case with most banks. They have this pretty streamlined. The value added that you experience by having this environment is you don't have to worry about identity at any given moment, right? People have an identity. A lot of work is happening in the background. It can be very complicated to provide the an experience to the end user that's seamless. Right, and it's quite a few moving parts from a technical side, but you don't want the developer to be worrying about that. So you have to provide as a service, and needs to be as seamless as possible to the development community.
Yeah, I find with a lot of organizations, it's almost a catch-22. If there's a reliable service that developers or applications can easily access, they would love that because it takes 20 or 30% of the coding out of their project. If it's done right, and it makes it a lot easier for them. But sometimes that doesn't exist. And so when it doesn't exist, they end up doing it themselves. When they do it themselves, they create one more silo, and it makes it harder to create that service because now you've got one more thing that you have to respect that's legacy.
Correct. And you'll run into snags as well. Look, I mean, let's say people moving to the cloud. The most obvious thing to use a federation where you basically retain control over your data access management, use a federation, ADFS to tie back the internal systems. Well, guess what? That will not scale very well as you move, you go 20, 30, 40, 60, 70,000 users because you're going to get the token bloating over there you have to deal with. So your thing has to adapt to the new environment, but yet keep the same concept in there that identity needs to be unified and, kind of a, dial tone concept.
Yeah, and the example you gave is just for the workforce, right? Imagine now taking applications that are serving, customer-facing initiatives where you have potentially millions.
Correct.
And think about the scale that's required there.
Scale matters not the next measure. Scale matters quite a bit, and people forget. At least in our case, we're large enough to worry about scale, and stretching the technology to its limits at this point.
Yeah, so Ankur, why is identity important, and how are you guys looking at it? As far as enabling the business?
See, identity, from an identity standpoint, it was very easy for us to move while we were working from home. Like it was very easy for us to move to homes and start working there because single sign-on, federation connectivities and, getting an AD there, getting an MFA there, all that was already existing. The challenge which we faced, and believe me, out of 3 days, which were like a nightmare for us to get people work from home in contact center, the challenge was the physical equipment because because of the compliance issues, we can't give them laptops. We'll have to give them desktops. Now in a lockdown state, how do you move desktop to their homes? That was one issue which was—
I'm sorry, why couldn't you give them laptops?
There was, because we were in an area which is, in our contact centers, we do not allow them to use phones and we do not allow them to use, they're always in a CCTV. So we made an investment in the desktop rather than laptop because one desktop is moved by 3 shifts.
Yes.
There's a 24-hour service. Right? So that's how it was. That's how the model was. Now, either you purchase, give laptops to these 70% of the employees overnight. That's an investment which you'll not be able to do it in 3 days.
That's where we're different than you. And to interject over here, we rely on bring your own device, and we'll use a thin client to connect back to the enterprise. We don't believe in equipping the workforce with separate laptops or desktops at home. The majority of the people will function just fine with a VDI client. Yeah. And that was a part of our strategy to go to as thin as possible. And we're also looking at in the context of the cloud, where they can use that, down the road as
we did this. So we were able to now move everybody on VDI. There are 50% of the people who are working on desktops given by Office, or the 50% of them who are working their personal machines. We were able to enable them on VDI. We were able to make voice SIP trunks move over VDI, which was a difficult task. When somebody calls you and you basically moving all your circuits over VDI. So that all was done over in next 3-4 days after the situation happened. And identity became important here because we have to make sure that every individual whatever way is coming on is there is a seamless connectivity which is given to him. Either he's logging as an AD or he's logging to a travel management system, or is logging to one of the middlewares, which is global distribution systems. All that connectivity has to be given from home in a single sign-on manner. Second, identity was important because now if this is from the employee standpoint, and we can say that, okay, we have 4,000 employees, so we were able to manage that. We were not that big as a number like a UBS bank, or but the identity became important for us when we start talking about identities of our customer. When we start talking about processes for which, say it should not happen that customer A asked for a refund and I'm giving a customer B a refund. Or customer A is booking and I'm sending an itinerary to email address of customer B, right? Somebody who is using a fraudulent credit card to make a booking on my website and I'm not able to catch hold of him. Those were the challenges which we were facing in this situation. And that was something in which we have brought a real digital transformation over last 3 months. Because that becomes a key for us. Earlier, it was all managed because it was non-COVID situation. We had integrations with third parties who can check whether a credit card is valid or not. We have integrations with parties who can help us validate whether the customer A is customer A. But the challenge actually came in when the COVID happened, and those were some 8.5 million identities which we need to kind of make sure that A works with A and B works with B.
So I've taken for granted the fact that everybody kind of has a good definition, or a relatively common definition of what identity and to some extent access management is. My experience is if you talk to 10 different people, they will tell you 10 different things. I'd love to have you guys just take a minute and define, what is identity in your world? How do you define it?
How do you find identity?
How do you define identity? When the stakeholders talk to you about, hey, you keep talking about identity, what is it? What do you say?
I mean, to authenticate people, right? Or devices, or entities in general.
Okay.
So I mean, that's people will understand the handle, because they understand that they have an identity and name, they have a login, they have some that is tied to them uniquely.
Yeah.
Which then can be used to control the access to resources.
And
I mean, that's just. Go ahead.
And when especially the stakeholders that don't necessarily understand a lot of the details, they understand single sign-on, right? And they understand that I have to make sure that you are who you say you are. But there's a lot more to that starts with vetting and proofing, right? In order to allow me to. Yeah.
I mean, that, again, going back to what I mentioned previously, there's entitled systems, right, that are in place, at least in the banking sector, that, are tied to the HR systems and other entitlement systems to basically load the users in terms of identity, and also given the appropriate access rights. So there's a whole ecosystem before somebody's provisioned with an identity and a password, or MFA. So that needs to be taking place, and that's occupied quite a bit of our activities. Have an entire division devoted just to that, to streamline that process and deal with exceptions and any issues that arise. So.
And even once that is vetted and quote unquote provisioned, right? There's a whole lifecycle management aspect to it.
That you need to have the movers, livers, joiners. It's pretty big, and you have to be able to react very quickly. You have to. So yeah, there's an entire apparatus that is in the background that needs to take care of that. I mean, people. You're absolutely right. As an end user, all you need is my user ID. It could be your email or whatever ID is assigned to you. And then you have to have a token or a thumbprint, or your retina scan, whatever it may be. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's where it ends. But how you arrive at that point, to the point where you achieve that is a complex ecosystem in the background. And in most cases, in most enterprise, you're talking about a lot of layering, right? It's not like, all of a sudden everybody, adopted Active Directory and everybody's happy. You have multiple types of directories residing in companies, that need to be reconciled and, worked on. And so you got to create a coherent model of how this thing fits in the background. But it's quite a bit of work depending on
Well,
the complexity of the organization.
and for a lot of us, you know, the problem isn't that I have a user ID and a password. The problem is that I have 10 user IDs and passwords.
Right.
And even if I'm
Well,
forced to use the same ID, you know, the password policies in these different systems dictate that I'm forced to change it here. I can only use 8 characters here. Over here, I have to put a $sign, right? Those kinds of things just make
Which
it
is
so that
precisely what don't allow that, which is precisely what I said. It needs to be a dial tone where, you know, people who develop applications need to rely on 2 or 3 different methods, which then tie back to a single sign-on, and it's a seamless experience. I don't think it's acceptable in nowadays with the technology available to force users to jump through those hoops. It creates a lot of security issues, opens, you know, gigantic holes, you know, not being able to transparently see what is happening in terms of user actions. So in our case, we believe in a single sign-on for every single user and every client that we deal with.
so
And
Ankur, maybe
yeah. So you know,
go
on
ahead.
the same context, basically that's where the concept of identity by design came in. Where if you are onboarding an application, or if you started developing an application, or you are, you know, so whichever project you're doing, can you think of integrating it with your own current identity management system? Which is whichever you're using. For example, you Okta or you know whatever Microsoft or whatever you're using, right? So that's where the concept of identity by design come in, where you know you are telling this is, if you wanted to come on board with us, this is the minimum criteria you'll have to meet, so that we can give our customers a seamless experience and agility to you know, to work and bring in security angle also. So if we are able to make identity agile, second, we are able to make identity seamless, and third, we are able to make identity secure, the work is done. That's what, you know, my thought is.
We're starting to get some good questions in the Q&A box. So I'd like to remind the audience, and by the way, one of the tough things on being on a panel like this is I can see the other panelists. I have no idea who else is out there. So I'm going to assume, based on the questions, that there's some other folks that are interested in this. The first question is, what do you think will be different when teams begin transitioning back to working in the office?
Social distancing.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, from my standpoint, there will be a lot of reckoning, at least on lessons learned, right? And what people who are working remotely. So what work would not work. But I don't see anything significant from our side with regards to the identity and access management we've been discussing as being something that will be kind of looked on as something that did not work, because it does work. It'll be more of the capacity going forward and prepare for another event of the same magnitude.
Ankur, thoughts?
Yeah, keeping identity topics slightly aside, you know, and focusing on that question which was asked I believe that, you know, it's by human, it's a natural instinct that we wanted to network, and that's one of the reason we go to office, we go to our workplace. People who have not been used to working from home, or you are kind of going out and networking and working mostly when they're in that workplace, for them coming back will be slightly difficult, but I think we will be able to, you know, bring them back easily. It will not take much of time. And I believe that, say, after next year, when we are, you know, participating in this summit, we will be at the same state which we were in 2019. We will be talking, there will be some hiccups. There will be hiccups like, you know, social distancing, you know, some of the, you know, more issues coming up in terms of logistics, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of identity management also. But I think things, you know, the challenges which you are facing right now will not be the same challenges which we'll be facing next year.
I think one of the things that's going to be very different is everything that we've put in place so far to protect all of the moats that we've put in place to protect the castle will be even less relevant. So all of the perimeters, all of the firewalls, and everything that we've done to try to get security will be even less relevant. And we really need to start paying attention to identity in order to have a good way to protect. Which brings me to the next question. How have identity threats evolved, and what kind of new attacks are you preparing for? As you guys kind of look at identity as the perimeter, if you buy into that, right? What are you doing with it to help you protect yourselves?
In our case, not much differently. I mean, we'll be dealing with this as a part of course, right? You know, since our workforce is remote most of the time. I mean, for example, a lot of my work is done remotely most of the day. So the same dangers we've been seeing, but they've been increased, some increased vectors of threats. But I don't think fundamentally the working from home, at least insofar as the identity access management is concerned, has addressed drastically. There are other dangers in cybersecurity that have gone through the roof, but not specifically related to identity access management.
Ankur?
So for us, I bring in identity as a slightly different, for us, identity is anything which is a PII, which I can connect with my metadata. That is an identity for us.
Yeah.
Right? And if I take that as an identity, there is always an evolution which is coming in because that data is most important for anyone to get hold of. Starting from in the morning when we wake up, the data which is required, which all these health companies wants to know that when did you wake up so that they can sell you all those, to your, when did you, to all the data which you are. So every day, like every time, even when we're talking on this conference, there's an identity that Ankur spoke about all this, what he'll be interested on. And, there are a lot of vendors who are talking and kind of, thinking about what tools I can kind of, partner with him. Right. So that is all about identity. Right. And I believe with more of AI coming in, more of products which are related to, any kind of automation which is coming in, identity protection on identity becomes much, much more important. And that is one of the transformation which I think will happen in next 2 years.
Yeah.
And, that's okay. Yeah, that's something.
All right, so here's a good one. Are VPNs the right approach, or do you need an app by app remote access? I'm personally seeing that VPNs are sort of outdated, and I'd love to get your take on that statement or your reaction.
Well, I mean, VPN is a very general term, right? I mean, it depends on what you're using. You will use some to connect back to the enterprise, right? Regardless of where you are, right? It could be a thin client, it could be a thick client, whatever. So, so I will turn the question around and say, do you need to impose secure in that channel of communication? The answer is yes, right? So what that takes the role of traditional VPN and IPsec channel, SSL, whatever wrap you're going to throw around it, you will need to secure the transmission between your device at home and the enterprise. What is going to get a lot more interesting in people who are not using VDI type technology is that, okay, if you're going to go in the environment where people have their own laptops, their own, desktops, and they have a full client from home connected by the enterprise, it becomes more crucial then to start worrying about other things from malware protection on their devices and during the enterprise, and the whole ecosystem comes with a NAC. But generally speaking, you should anticipate and expect that connections initiated from your clients or employees remotely need to be using a secure transmission mode. Okay, what that can take, and the form may vary depending on what what circumstances are. You may end up having to throw IPsec channels for your clients and for the partners and certain clients. You may have to use thin clients for others. So I wouldn't just discount everything. You need to be very systematic depending on who your audience is.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Ankur?
I believe that it depends on business, and it depends on what kind of business are you in. If you are too dependent on the infrastructure which is hosted in your network, then definitely VPN work. If you have applications which are third-party applications which you access the most, and that's where you need to your business is focusing on, then layer 7 application level connectivities and those kind of things work. But yes, this as we progress, I think the need for VPN slowly, and as we are getting more and more cloud based and more SaaS based, need of VPNs will slowly come down, and I think the needs for layer 7 application connectivities will take up slightly more take up the reap.
Yeah, but look at your clients and your partners. They will define the means of communication. So if it ends up a case where you launch a few applications serve the major of the needs, sure there will be a move from VPN away from VPN, but I don't anticipate that to be whole scale. You have to identify the uses, and that will give you the technology to use.
Here's an interesting one. What is the single most important thing to focus on when it comes to digital identity? And if I may, I'll get us started. Right, from my perspective, one view of the user, one ID, one set of credentials, and then everything about them that is necessary to interact with them effectively, regardless of where they're coming from or how they're interacting. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's the most important thing. But again, going back to what we were conversing previously, don't forget the entitlement systems, the whole ecosystem that exists in provisioning that. And most people forget that, and that's where the rubber meets the road, and you have all sorts of issues that, don't provide that dial tone quality.
Well, and you bring up a very valid point, right? The dial tone that exists today when it comes to identity for most organizations is what I would call an authentication dial tone.
Yeah.
There really isn't an authorization dial tone in most organizations yet. Right? So if you look at the way applications are architected, most of them will reach out through federation to an IDP. They'll get confirmation that the user is who they say they are, or the IDP will authenticate the user. There might be 3 or 4 attributes or some group memberships that come in as part of that assertion, but really it's on the application to then make access decisions
Correct.
within the application.
Correct.
Right? We have not gotten to where we have what I would call an authorization dial tone yet. I think that opportunity exists. It's just not there yet. Ankur?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I somehow agree with you, and I agree with the thoughts that there's an opportunity which exists here, and it's just about managing that opportunity. When it comes to single most focus, I believe that the single most focus, along with seamless connectivity, and is security, and securing that access, making sure that you get more and more, as more and more threat vectors comes in, whatever technology we are using behind, that is capable of handling more and more security for protecting that particular identity.
Okay. I think we're running out of time, but I'll throw one more at you guys. How does the move to an API-centric model impact identity? And again, I'll get us started. An API is in and of itself an identity. One of the things that's really important is to understand the relationship between the API and who, quote unquote, owns that API behind the scenes, right? If you don't start understanding those relationships, then you have a hole. But absolutely, right, it's now about not just people, it's about devices, it's about APIs, it's about bots, it's about service accounts, and all of those are identities. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would add secrets management to that, right? Which is one of the biggest issues that I see right now, especially in DevOps climate that we're into. Where do secrets go? We're all tired of developers hard coding those secrets in their code, so a different model. So it kind of all blends together. But I would be advising people to look at the secrets management practice very, very carefully in that context of the API-centric model. And the provisioning of the identities.
Yeah, the secrets management aspect of it is absolutely critical. I would agree.
And I think this is a good question actually, because right now, what at least in e-commerce and online travel space, we or tech companies are moving towards is making their APIs more and more public. And when it comes to the public API, it's very difficult to manage on who is accessing your API. So you'll have to bring in those aspect of knowing the identity of the person over the internet, who's basically accessing your API and getting, one is a seamless experience and getting the security around it. Yes, so that is also one, the way either the APIs work or the way cookies work or the way pixels work, all those have to be, all the, there has, and as more and more of this become public, we need to put in controls, and we need to know who are accessing it over internet, and which is a difficult task to know, right? So we need to capture thousands of parameters around it.
All right, I think we're out of time. Gentlemen, this was great. I really appreciate you taking the time and providing these insights. Audience, hopefully this was valuable. We did not get to all the questions. We will take some time to try and answer those after the session. But if you do have questions or other things that you'd like to discuss, reach out to any of us. I think we'd all, appreciate the opportunity to interact with you as part of the social aspect of this that we're now missing in person. So thank you for attending.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.